Hey guys, it's Jake here with eTrailer. Today we've got a 2021 Ford F-350 and we're going to be taking a look at, and I'm going to show you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite Red Label Air Helper Springs. If you're using your F-350 to tow heavier loads, you may notice on the back of your truck that your truck sags a lot and it feels uncomfortable when you're driving it. Whether that be your headlights aren't pointed where they're supposed to be, you feel a little loose in the steering on the front, or you can feel the constant bouncing and slamming of the back of your truck when you're hauling those heavier loads. This particular truck is always towing an 18,000 pound camper from the fifth wheel here in the back. That is going to be a very, very heavy load, even for this truck to be towing. The back end of this truck doesn't have the jounce bumper purchase either, so it doesn't even have that quicker engagement of the jounce bumper. So the back of this truck has a lot of travel in it before it's going to stop traveling. Airbags or air helper springs are going to help with that load carrying capacity. It's not going to change the load carrying capacity of your truck, it's just going to help to reduce the amount of sag. With this particular kit, you are going to get 2 manual inflation valves, which we always like to put here on the back of our license plate. I like them here because they're very convenient to get to. No one's really going to mess with them because they're probably not sure what they're for, but all you have to do is simply remove this cap, put your air in, and whenever you're done with it, a lot of times you can use the little button on the cap itself to let the air out. You can get yourself like a bike tool or something like that to be able to unscrew them so that you can let the air out a little faster. Just be sure, because we don't have an onboard air compressor, be sure you're always leaving 5 psi in them. The reason for that is because the airbags need to have some air in it, obviously because of the pressure downward. If you're hitting bumps and stuff like that, you don't want the bags folding or rubbing on each other, but especially if you take your truck to a shop or something like that and you hang the rear axle from these airbags, which you can do with these. Airlift airbags, you're not supposed to do it because they're band clamped together, whereas these have a cap that's crimped around them. But with that happening, if you take it to a shop or something to get an oil change, you can hang the airbags, but you want to have some air in it so that they keep the shape. When it comes to the capacities of these airbags, we already said there's a minimum of 5 psi. That's going to be for any airbag out there on the market. But you're going to have a maximum of 150 psi, which I can say right now, you're probably not going to get anywhere close to that because these are the red label bags. They're a thicker construction than the 5,000 pound bags. These are going to have a load carrying capacity of 7,500 pounds. Just to give you a small example, I had a camper that weighed about 10,000 pounds with water in it, maybe 12,000 pounds when all the tanks were full. And I only had to put 13 psi in my red label bags. Just gives you kind of a scope. If I had 5,000 pound bags on it, so the smaller versions, I may have had to put more like 30 or 40 in. So it's just really up to you what size bag you want to go with. It just may require less air to do that. But having that 150 psi capacity is going to give you the ability to adjust it how you want. Now let's go ahead and take the truck inside. I'll put it up on the lift for you and we'll show you what the airbags look like when they're installed. They're going to mount between the bottom of our frame rail and the top of our axle. This is what's going to help do the physical action of limiting the travel of our suspension. What you want is the suspension to still go up and down a little bit. It's just going to help to reduce the amount of sagging that you have in the rear end of your truck. You'll see the double convoluted design, which basically just means that we have 2 bubbles here instead of 1 big airbag. This is going to help the airbag to travel up and down like a spring. Now that you've seen what the airbags look like and we've told you a little bit about them, let's show you how to get them installed. To begin your installation, what you need to do is you need to lower your spare tire to get it out of the way. That'll help give us a lot more room to be able to work with the airbags and where they're going to go. Then we're going to take a jack of some sort. We're using a trans jack to be able to lift up on the back of the vehicle because our truck's up on a lift. If you're doing this from the ground, just use a floor jack, lift up on the back hitch. That's going to separate the frame from the axle a little bit more, so it also gives us more room to put the airbag assembly up and in place. Next, we're going to come up to our jounce bumpers, and we're going to take these off with a 15 millimeter socket. Just take off each of these nuts. I'll take a flathead screwdriver, and we're going to pry up or I guess pry down on this little bracket and pop these bolts out, because we're going to need to put a bracket up inside of this hole. Next, we're going to need to put a couple of zip ties on our bracket that goes up inside of our frame rail. And I've got one on here, but to show you, you go through the square hole and back through the triangle hole. This is how they want you to do it in the instructions, and I can tell you if you do it the opposite way or any other way, it does not work. And essentially what these are these are going to end up being little pull wires for us to be able to pull down on this bracket while we're putting the bolt up and in place. Now lift it up, put the zip tie up in there first. If you can reach up on this side with your finger, pull the zip tie down through. And then may have to rotate this a little bit to get that to toss the head of the zip tie up in there first and then pull it down through. And then our bolts, or those nuts that are welded on that plate, are going to line up with the little indents where the bolts were previously. Take your brackets, your top brackets, they're going to look like this. You see these little holes here? That's for those zip ties. You'll have one on each side. We're going to lift our bracket up, fish those zip ties through the holes. And we'll lift it up, and it'll rest right against our frame rail, just like that. And you'll take the longer black bolts that come in your kit. They're going to have a flat head on them with a Allen head drive on it. We'll just get this started in those weld nuts. I will say those weld nuts are kind of sloppy. May not be a bad idea to kind of test fit the bolt to see how hard it's going to be, just so you know that you're not cross-threaded when you're threading these in. We'll take a 5.5 millimeter Allen key and tighten these up. Then grab a torque wrench and torque these bolts to the specifications on top of the airbag. Next, we're going to put our lower bracket together. I've already got this one together so I can show you a little bit easier. You'll take your bracket that looks like this. It'll have these little triangle pieces. You want those facing inward on the truck, and then you'll take your bracket that looks like this and put it underneath, and then take a couple of the short flathead bolts, run them through, put some flange nuts on them, and then for each side, since we don't have the John's bumper perch on your vehicle, you might have one there. We ended up having to use the shorter one-sided bracket. There's another bracket that comes in your kit that's a little bit taller. That is because the John's bumper perch sits up a little higher, and these parts of the bracket don't actually touch the hitch. They sit on top of that John's bumper. So if you don't have it, you're going to want to follow exactly the way we are. If you do have it, you want to either check out another video on our website or look at your instructions. So we'll take this bracket, we've got it assembled, and we're going to roll it into place. And I may end up having to, I have to switch this. I'm going to switch this bracket to the other side because we have a brake line here. So I'm actually going to have to flip this bracket over to the other side. It doesn't matter which way you mount it, but I do need to swap it so that our bracket is sitting correctly and not on top of that brake line. We've got that bracket flipped around, and I'm just gonna, real quick, I'm gonna cut these zip ties off. You can do it as soon as you're done tightening those. But what we need to do now is, I know we just lifted it up into place, and that helped us to get the John's bumper down a little bit easier, but you wanna lower your truck back down onto the factory suspension and at the normal ride height, and then take a measurement from the top of this bracket to the bottom of this bracket. Look in your instructions. It'll tell you if you do or do not have to use the spacer that comes with the kit. We've already done that. Our spacing is about 6.5 inches, or more like 6 3/4, so we are going to have to use the spacer. Now we've got our airbag upside down. We've got our long bolt, our spacers in there. You'll have a little bushing that goes in between it. And we'll take this, drop it down. We're just going to Thread this bolt in loosely because we'll have to lift this whole assembly up into place, mark it for however this airbag needs to be turned like this, and forward and backwards, and then we can pull it back down, but we're going to show you how to do that. Now we'll take this assembly, we'll lift it up into place, and we'll have to push down a little bit, but you shouldn't have to push down too much because we got the suspension spread out a little bit. What you want to do, there's two sets of holes here. You're going to want to use the forward set of holes on each side of the vehicle. So if you're doing the driver's side, you want to still use the front set to lock it in. And you'll feel this little tab that you can see. That little tab is going to go in that smaller back hole. We'll get it lined up. What you want to do is make sure that the bottom bracket is parallel to the top bracket, which you can kind of see in the airbag. It'll fight you if it's not. And then what we'll do is we're going to make sure that it's straight this way, like forward and backwards. And then we're going to leave it there. We're going to mark the bag, this, the spacer, and then this bracket, the lower bracket. That way, when we take it off, we know where it has to be bolted down to. The other thing you want to do is you want to try to reach under here and put a little mark on that bolt we just put in the bottom of the bag. Now you make sure your 3 lines are lined up here. Your line is lined up in the middle of the bolt on the bottom. We'll take a torque wrench, very carefully torque this down to the specifications that are listed on top of this airbag. Before we lift our assembly back up into place, we're going to take our air fitting, thread it down, and then we'll want to tighten this fitting until you get pretty close to the last threads that have that thread sealer on it. You don't have to go all the way, but you want to get enough of them buried inside of this fitting so that it'll seal it. We'll take our airbag, put it back up into place. And we'll take the large nylon lock nut that comes in our kit and thread this onto the top. I like to do this step before continuing on with the rest of this because right now I can lift it up off of our axle and tell that that pin is locked up inside there. If that pin is not, you can crush and it will cause the airbag to leak. Now we'll take our heat shield, pull this down, put our heat shield in, and then put it right back up. And then for this next step, I like to leave the bottom of this loose from the axle because I like to be able to tell whether or not this pin is truly locked up inside, just like that. So we'll take our large nylon lock nut that comes in our kit and thread that on the top here. For this next part, you'll need a 15/16 wrench. A ratcheting wrench really does work a lot better. It just makes this process a little faster. We'll throw that on top and then tighten this down. Then you'll want to grab a torque wrench and torque this nut down to the specifications in the instructions. I can tell you this is pretty difficult to do. Now we could take the full weight of the vehicle and put it on top of the airbags. You can see it's still, it's doing fine. It doesn't have a ton of pressure on the airbag. We can still move it a little bit, but you're going to want to adjust this lower bracket with that pressure on it. Now we're going to take the bracket that looks like this. This little notch here is designed to fit in between these, the U-bolt on the outside of our spring assembly here. So we're going to have to slide this up and in there. The tricky part here is that we also have these 4 bolts that have to go through the back side of here and come out through these holes on our lower bracket. So essentially, the best way I've found to do it is take 2 bolts, put them through the rear side, I guess. And then because of the brake caliper, it makes those really hard to get in there if you don't put them in right now. But now that we have this side in and the bolts already run, all we have to do is worry about getting the bolts to slide in the other side. The trick to these is going to be to slide them in exactly at this angle. So we'll tuck this bolt back up in here, get it to pop through our opening, and then slide it back through. And that has always worked pretty well for me. And then we'll just take them, slide them through these slots, and follow it up with a flange on each one of them. And I always like to pull these to the outside so that way they're straight, because it's kind of, sometimes they'll line up a little weird from the back bracket to the front. So just try to make these cross bolts as straight as possible. And once you've got your bag as straight as you want it to be, we'll take a 14mm socket and snug these down. When you're doing this, you want to make sure you're putting even pressure on each one of them. So do it a little bit on these two and then a little bit on the front, and then we'll torque them down. Grab the longer bolts that come in your kit. These are the longest bolts. We're going to put one up front, one back here. You're going to have some arrow looking tabs up here. They're adjustable so that you can move them kind of wherever you need to. We're going to take this brake line, just barely bend it out of our way. And then these lower brackets are kind of funky, but they come in 4 pieces. You just want to put it together like this, and then this is going to be this half. Then we'll take another carriage bolt. There's only going to be 2 of these in your kit. We'll slide it through the front side here, and then we'll line it up with the back. We'll grab a 14mm wrench and snug all 3 of these up. You kind of want to work each one of them a little bit, and then we'll come back and torque all of them to the specifications. A lot of this hardware can be a little tricky to get to, so you might need a 14mm crow's foot in order to get to some of it. The way it's going to work is that you can kind of wrap from an angle, because like here we couldn't get a socket on it, so we really need a wrench. But we'll just work very carefully and get each one of these torqued down. Once you get the passenger side done, we're going to turn our attention to the driver's side, which I've already completed for you guys. Just so I can show you the differences, we've got no heat shield on the side, so you don't have to worry about that. And then down here, this bracket with all of these brake lines and stuff on it did give us a little bit of trouble, and I've done several of these in the past, and this is the best way to fix a problem. What you want to do is, this is the original hole where this breather tube is going through. So just unscrew this breather tube, lower this, rotate this bracket down and around the axle, and drill yourself a new hole the same size that that is. And the reason for that is because this bracket gets in the way of us mounting our lower bracket for our airbag. So you will have to move it, rotate it around the axle in order to get our lower bracket in place. I would recommend taking this front threaded portion here, this bolt, and cut any excess off that you don't need on there. Maybe leave a 1/2 inch of threads showing through on the bottom of this bolt, but I would cut most of it off so that it doesn't interfere with our sway bar like it is now. What we need to do next is we're going to take our airline and we're going to run it from the tops of our bags to the back of the truck. I'm going to go ahead and run it, and then we'll come back and show you. You'll take the airline, make a nice clean cut on it, and make sure there's no jagged edges. What we use to cut them here is an airline tool, airline tubing cutter tool. It's basically just a razor blade on a flat surface that makes a nice clean cut. Pop that into your fitting there, and then we just ran our airline back. If you have one of these mounts for your shock, which you should here, just run it in that. That'll help to protect it a little bit and keep it organized. Then follow your factory wiring all the way back till you get to your bumper. Now we'll want to put about 50 psi in each one of our airbags to be able to test for leaks properly, because you want it to be under some significant pressure. Take a bottle of soapy water. This is just dish soap and water mixed into a spray bottle. We're going to check all of our fittings that we made, or all our connections that we made in our fittings. So for us, it's going to be 4. If you tied them off into a T, which you can definitely do, to air both airbags up at the same time at the same exact PSI, you can just do those fittings themselves. So we'll just spray each one of these. And what you're looking for is right here. You're looking for rapid bubbles to be forming at the insertion site of the airline. So what we're going to have to do with this is we'll have to pop that fitting out, or pop this airline out, repress it in, and then try this again. Once you've fixed all your leaks and you put your spare tire back up into place, that's going to do it for the installation. Hopefully this video helped you decide whether or not the Firestone Air Helper Springs is right for you and your 2021 Ford F-350.